All right. Hi, Umang. Can you confirm that you can hear me? Okay. I want to make sure everything is working fine before we start. So if one of you can please let me know, that'll be great. Okay, cool. Thank you, Umang. All right. Today we are talking about BigQuery and how Google Analytics 4 data shows up in BigQuery. So thank you for joining today's live session. And those who have attended this session in past know the drill. You can type your questions. I'm going to be looking at sideways. That means I am looking at the question screen where your questions and comments are coming. And then I will be sharing my screen with you to walk you through how the data looks in BigQuery. So how many of you have used Google Analytics 4? Just type in yes, no, have you used it or not? And also, who here has played with BigQuery or is familiar with BigQuery? Hi, Ravi. Yes. So tell me, before I go into diving into BigQueries, I want to make sure. Yes, Ravi. Yes, Umang. Hi. Yeah, I want to know, have you used BigQuery or have you used Google Analytics 4? If not, then I will start with Google Analytics 4, just a little bit of Google Analytics 4. And then I will go into BigQuery. So I just want to hear from one or two people whether they have used Google Analytics 4. Somewhat familiar, Ravi? No. Okay. All right. That answers. Two people are active right now. So I'm just going to listen to those two and then we'll go from there. Google Analytics 4 is very different from how Google Analytics used to work, which basically means is in past you had page views and then you had to track special events. In Google Analytics 4, that's not the case. Google Analytics 4 is all event based. When I started my career in web analytics, this is how we used to do it. Every hit was logged and then we used to analyze that data. We're going back to the same thing. I was talking to somebody who's been in the industry for quite some time. And we were just having this discussion like how we went in a different direction and we're going back, which is every hit. So when a user comes onto your site, there is a hit recorded. That hit uh, happens for every action user takes. And that is what Google Analytics 4 is doing. When a user arrives, there is an event. They're calling it events. Every event is logged. So user lands on a site, that's an event. They start there, this is their first time, that's an event. They load a page or a screen, that's an event. They scroll down, that's an event. Click on a button, that's an event. So you can see every single user action is an event. And that's the data that flows into BigQuery. Each of these events can have parameters. So you can assign more values to this event to make it more meaningful. There are certain events that Google Analytics 4 captures by default. Session start, new visit, first visit. Those events are automatically tracked. If a user comes in, there are 3 or 4 events that are automatically captured about that user. When you put your JavaScript code on your page or via Google Tag Manager, I expect you to do it via Google Tag Manager. It also captures 6 other events. And those events are called enhanced measurement events. They are page views, page scrolls, file downloads, external link clicks, on-site search, YouTube embedded video enable tracking. All these things required, except page view, required you to put extra code or do extra tracking within Google Tag Manager in the previous version of Google Analytics, which is Universal Analytics. When I say previous, it's still the current one. Majority of the companies are still using and will continue to use the Universal Analytics one. However, the new way, which is Google Analytics 4, is going to be the default way how companies are going to move forward or how individuals are going to start using Google Analytics. So it's critical, in my opinion, in looking at how things are progressing. If you look at Google Analytics 4 today, not every report that was available in previous version of Google Analytics. How many of you are familiar with Google Analytics, Universal Analytics? Just say yes or no. So in that previous version of Google Analytics or Universal Analytics, you had tons of pre-canned reports and metrics, like bounce rate is there. If you look at your left navigation menu, there are lots of reports. However, in new Google Analytics or Google Analytics 4, those reports are gone. Very few canned reports are available. So what's going on here? There are two things that are happening. One, the the Google Analytics 4, there is something called Analysis Hub. That is what Google is pushing. Very similar to, not exactly the same thing, but very similar to Adobe Analytics interface, which is where you have Analysis Hub, which is called Workspaces, sort of. And it's not one-to-one comparison, but still they're kind of similar. You can create your own reports by using metrics, dimensions, segments, and filters. So that's what that's where the reports are going. Second thing that's happening is BigQuery. Since the raw data is coming into BigQuery, you can do pretty much any analysis that you want on the data that's available. And that's what I'm going to show you here, is how that data comes into BigQuery. I'm not going to go through the process of setting it up from Google Analytics 4 to BigQuery. That's covered in a separate video. So if you check, there is another video that I did on this subject where I showed you how to bring the data and even showed you how to write a query. There are many use cases on BigQuery usage in analysis. I cover those in my course. So if you are a member of Opticent Academy, if you are a pro member, then you will be able to get all these different use cases that I'm building as I'm going through. So with these use cases, you can take your analysis to pretty much the next level, I would say, at deeper level, where you can find out everything about an individual user, everything about an individual event. You can do all sorts of analysis that's missing in the pre-canned report, or even was not even possible in those reports if you look at the previous version of Google Analytics. So BigQuery is going to be the most critical thing, in my opinion. And if you are going to be in web analytics, Google Analytics space, keep in mind, BigQuery is going to become very, very critical. SQL or SQL is almost required for any job these days. I come across these job postings, and I hear from people and see my LinkedIn feed. All the jobs pretty much require SQL. So become familiar with SQL. It could be BigQuery, it could be Microsoft SQL Server, or what is that? MySQL. Any kind of SQL, you just learn the basic syntax for SQL is pretty much similar with differences depending on the platform. And BigQuery SQL is slightly different than what you will use in a Microsoft SQL Server. But once you understand the concepts, then it's same. All right. Any questions so far? So I'm going to look at these here, and then I'll come back. I have a question. What's the primary reason for Google to shift from session-based to event-based? Good question. What's happening is they're trying to bring offline, online data, as well as app data, right? So rather than being a session, when you have an app running, when does the session end? Most of the tools today are now event-based. Something is happening, that's an event. Also, if you think about, you want to bring in offline data. So somebody goes into your store, purchases some stuff. That's an event. And when the data comes in, when they make a purchase, that transaction is an event. You can't pinpoint a session there. Maybe you can call it a session if you want. There is also session information, which actually does get captured. There is a session ID. But more and more, it's going to be event based. So within a session, you can have multiple events. Does that make sense? Session concept is still there, however, not in the same way that you are used to thinking in the previous Google Analytics versions. So they're moving from page view to event based. That's a fair thing to say. Everything is event based. So page view is also an event. Yes, screen is not shared, but you can see me, right? I'm not sharing anything at this point. Okay. You guys can see me, right? I'm not invisible at this point, correct? Umang? I am going to be sharing my screen in a few minutes now. Okay. Any other questions before I dive into BigQuery now? And that's where I'll start to share my screen. Cool. Okay, let's do the screen share now. No, session ID is a session ID, not a client ID. Session is still considered when the user starts, it's still a session. We'll take a look at it here. Can you guys see my screen? All right, I'm gonna just wait for the screen to pop up. Okay. Well, I'm not able to see my screen here. Hold on. Seems like you guys can't see my screen. Okay. All right, when it shows up, then I'll start here. Seems like my screen is now, I'm sharing it. So you guys should be able to see it. Now, again, I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, it's popping up. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what was going on. So you guys should be able to see my screen now. What you are seeing on my screen is BigQuery, where I have bunch of projects listed. These are the projects. So each BigQuery, when you put the data, it creates a project. When you create this project, while linking your Google Analytics 4 into BigQuery, you'll see something similar. You can give your project a name. I'm going to look into Optizen test project. So click on it here, and then you'll see analytics and then bunch of numbers. These are your stream ID numbers. So you are looking at when Google Analytics 4, where the data is coming from. And then you have two sets of tables. When I say sets, these are partition tables. One is an intraday table. So I can, within Google Analytics 4, I can decide whether I want to send real-time data as it comes in to BigQuery or not. And then also whether I want to roll it up in a day. So here is a day view and there is an intraday. There are certain things that are not going to be visible in intraday view. So when you look at these things, let's take a look. Clicking on this will open up all the fields that are available in this table. So you can see all the fields. And I'm going to go through these fields to show you what they are. And similarly, when you click on this table, right here, you can see all the fields. Now, what kind of data that comes in is, let's say I want to look at the data in here, click on query table, and I'm going to use star here and then run query. So I'm not going to go into details of SQL here. Just want to focus entirely on what kind of data is there. So here you can see all sorts of data that's coming in, all these values listed, fields listed across. And for every single user event, a row is logged here. So you can see row number 1, what was the event date? So that is the date that we are when this event happened. A timestamp so that Google Analytics can tell exactly when this event happened. And then what was the name of the event? One thing is critical for you guys is to become familiar with the names of the events. You will be using that over and over again. And these event names are, as I said, there are certain events that are automatically captured. There are also events that are called enhanced measurement events. And then there are events that are recommended events by Google Analytics 4 for certain things. On top of that, you can also create your own custom events. So there is possibilities are endless in terms of what you can track. And as I think, who was asking here? I think Ravi was asking about the session, right? Here is your session. Where did it go? Session ID. So it's and session ID, session number. It's all passing those values for you to get an idea of when the user started their session, etc. Okay, I'm just looking at here to see if there are any questions. Then you have event name, and then you have event parameters and values. Event parameters and values are spread across. So you got event keys, which is a record. Those who are familiar with relational databases in SQL, say SQL Server, etc., might not be familiar with this concept here, which is you have an object within an object. You have a small, tiny table within each row. Think of this as a separate table with its own columns and values. That is the trickiest thing to understand. If you understand that, then SQL becomes easy. But I cover that how to actually use those values in I showed in my previous video how you can actually unnest this, which is called unnest, or you can look for unnest SQL statement. That'll take these values and convert them into columns. So you got event names, event parameters, which are of type record. And then you have these values which are spread across. So event parameters, string values are shown in one column. Integer values, which are numeric values, are shown in another column. So this integer values ties back to this session ID. So think about, here are a bunch of values, bunch of parameters, and their values are in multiple columns, depending on the type of data that parameter contains. So session ID is a numerical value. Page location is a string value. String means characters. And then page title is also a string value. Session number is a numerical value. So string values are stored in this column. Numerical values are stored in this column. Then you also have float, double, right? That's it. This is where all the values end. So you have double, float, int. And the difference between double and float, I think they're just using one. They're kind of similar in nature. They store decimal numbers. But one of them is going to be removed in future. I think only float is used, if I understand this correctly. All right, any questions so far on this one? So this is where the main event parameters come in. Similar to event parameters, that you also have user properties that are also of type record. Rest of the values are within that row only. So there is only one value for each of the other columns except this column, event parameters and the user properties. If I scroll further here, where did the user property go? Geo device. It's kind of hard to scroll through all these right here. It's very small screen is there. So you have user properties. Those will be listed here. Let me see if I can find some user properties. They should be here. Yeah. I'll find some user properties where user properties should show up. Maybe I can check in this column right here. I'm sure something is coming up here. All right. Any questions so far? No questions? Yeah, here. You can see the student user properties here. And this is the column. You can again see whether user is a paid and what's the level of that student's membership. It's a paid student and membership level is 1. So you can see these align back to user properties here. User property key and their values. So it's very similar to what you see in event. Then scrolling further, you have event value. Event value is something that you can pass for every single event. You can assign a value, whether it's a page view event, whether it's a session start event. That is for something for within your organization to understand how valuable is this action by user. Let's say user downloads a PDF. Pretty simple example. Most of the organizations use that as a valuable event. Why? Because when somebody downloads a PDF, that means they are going to look at it, or percentage of users. Let's say only 10% people who download a white paper will actually look at it. Of those 10%, maybe another 10% actually initiate a call with a salesperson. And of those, let's say another 10%, whatever, you can keep those numbers, another 10% then engage and buy, whatever, right? You can do all sorts of steps in middle. And ultimately, if the buy value, let's say, is $100, so 100 downloads turn into 100, and one person buys it, and that's of $100. So 100 people downloaded the white paper, one person bought it, and their value was $100. That means each download is worth $1. That's how you can calculate. In that scenario, you can pass a value of 1 in this event. That'll show up right here. This allows you to also conduct further analysis by writing your SQL queries to see which events are driving more value for your organization, and how much is the total value that is being generated. Some of these things are shown in Google Analytics, some of these are not. When I say Google Analytics, the canned report, and some of them are not. But having the data in this format, you can write all sorts of query. You don't have to rely on Google Analytics canned reports or even Analysis Hub. You can recreate a bunch of that here. You can put Google Data Studio on top of it and then conduct your analysis there as well. Then you have event sequence ID. It is just like when Google Analytics is passing these events back to Google BigQuery, and in what sequence they are passed. So that's the sequence number there. It's for internal use. You have time offset, how much from the GMT away is, or what's the time difference from GMT. User ID, if you are using a particular user, so let's say your users are logging in that scenario, you can pass a user ID to each user, and then you will have that information here. Having user ID in here, so let's say the user logs into your site, you have a user ID which you pull from your CRM or logging system, pass it to Google Analytics. In that case, you can bring other data from other places, let's say your CRM system, their purchase history, contact history, whatever you want to bring in, and tie it with this user ID to get a complete picture. Not only you know who converted and who bought or who did not buy, but you also now know, let's assume you have all sorts of data on them, their household income, how many kids they have, married or not, what kind of house they own, what kind of car they own, what color preferences they have. Everything possible that you can have in your database, you can bring it here and tie it to online data now. Offline data can come in. If they go in your store, they purchase something, you take their loyalty card information there. That can be tied to their ID. And then you can see how people are behaving between offline and online, what kind of purchases they're doing, what's their frequency, what's their value, etc. So as you can see, by tying user ID, the possibilities are pretty much endless here. This is something used internally by Google to identify a user. Then you have user property keys, bunch of these values. So user properties, very much like user IDs, some of the properties you can pass it online. So like I pass two properties. What is the student paid or not? Right, there are in this scenario, yes or no, or yes or blank. If the student is paid, then it comes as yes. And what is the level of their membership? 1, 2, 3, what kind of level they are. So that'll be stored in the properties. I can pass in other preferences, what colors of products they are looking at, what brands they are interested in. Everything that I can track online, I can pass it as a user property. Any questions so far? All right, then you have user property, user first touch timestamp. When was the user first touched? If you have that information, if the user is coming in today for the first time, that'll be their first touch timestamp. Lifetime value of that user. This does not show up in intraday, but it gets calculated later, and so will show up in the roll-up events. One thing I want to talk about this intraday and roll-up here is real-time data comes in, and if you choose based on your settings to roll it up on a daily basis, you won't have intraday for previous days. In my scenario, I created a bunch of intradays as well as roll-up days. But every day you'll see an intraday. At the end of the day, intraday gets rolled into the main day. So you'll have a daily roll-up here. Then you have device category. What category user is, what's the category of this user's device, whether they are on desktop or not. Apple is the brand name, mobile brand name. I'm not sure it's why they call mobile brand name in this case, because it's actually Apple and it's using Macintosh. So because it's kind of confusing here, but that's how the Google is sending the data. So if I have to look at what device Google is user is using, I will device category, I'll use this one. And I think this is just a misnomer here. Safari, and they're using on Macintosh. So then you have all the information about your devices. Moving along, you have tons of information about the device. So you'll know exactly which product Google users are using to come to your site, what kind of device, and tons of information about that device. Very critical for creating the best experience. So mainly for the UX folks to understand, and also for conversion optimization guys to know, like where are these kind of conversions happening or not conversions happening. So you can look at that information. Then you have whether the device is enabled for ad tracking or limited ad tracking or not. Here is your language. Then you have device browser, web browser that user is using, device web browser info, what version they are using, what's the host name of the site, which page or if you have multiple sites, let's say if you're doing cross domain tracking, you will be able to see the host name of all your sites. And if some spammers are taking your code and putting on their site, you will be able to find that here as well. The geo continent, where is the user located? Bunch of information about users location. And these are specific to, not tied to user at that point. These are tied to where the event is happening. So let's say if I am in Seattle, but then I go to India and I conduct an event, user properties will be tied from, say, hey, this is Anil who is in Seattle. That's my user property. However, these are tied to that event. Event is saying continent is Asia, country is India. So see the difference there. Where is the user from? Where do they log in from? or where do they use your site? Those are the two things that are all available here. So you can look at those different things. And then you have Metro. Then finally, you have this app information, like what app was used, version, which store it was installed from. Let's say if it's a mobile app, was it Apple Store, whether it's a Google Store or whatever it's called. And those locations will be listed here. App ID within that, which are for using for internal IDs. Where was the install source? How did they install it? All that stuff, if your app is capturing it, that can be passed here. Yes. Can you please explain again? Which one? Ravi. The location? Okay, I'll wait for your question, but I'm going to continue here. So then you have the traffic source name, traffic medium, traffic source. These are tied to the user. There is a bit of things that I was trying to find out is all their documentation points me to the users when the user was first acquired. I could not find any information which says the subsequent events when they are happening. So either Google's documentation is incorrect, or I am not finding the right information. I am going to actually research more on the traffic source, name, medium, and source, because these are critical things. There are two ways these things can be captured, right? One is where was the user acquired from, and the second is where was the session acquired from. If you look in Google Analytics 4, both those things are available to you. So I could be acquired from search engines, but then my session came via email. Those things need to be captured. I will provide a subsequent information, or somebody who's interested can reach out to me and I can provide more details there. Seattle, India example. Okay. So there is a user, right? I am in Seattle. If you track me and you can pass that information as a user property. User property tells where it's tied to a user, not to a session. That's how you should do it. Who is this user? This is Anil. He lives in Seattle. So you will be able to track that information somewhere around in user properties right here. You can pass that as where I'm passing paid student level. You can pass user location. Then there is also geolocation that is dependent on where I'm using my device from. So if I'm in Seattle, my user property can say he's Seattle or US resident. When I take my phone to India and browse this site, this geolocation will be marked as India. So you can see if your users are using your site from different places, even though, or traveling, for travel sites, this might be critical. For other sites which are subscription based, let's say you're selling your subscription to somebody in Seattle, but somebody is in India continues to use that information, that might tell you like, hey, your users are giving their information to others for them to use, like Netflix, for example. Netflix might sell me a subscription. They'll say Anil is in Seattle. So user property is Seattle. However, the usage of this particular login happened in India. So those are the two differences. One is, think about this, those who are back in the thinking in terms of session. Where is this session happening? And where was the user actually from? Does that make sense, Ravi? Okay. Okay, cool. So then you go follow along and you have the app, traffic source information, stream ID, and then web platform, which platform is being used here. Again, that goes back to desktop. It's the web. This is the platform your app was built on. So it's like a mobile site, or the site is actually what it's telling you here. Then you have event dimensions, host name. I'm not sure why they threw in this one separate from everything else. I haven't been able to find any information here, but this should be part of your event properties, in my opinion. Again, I think Google Analytics is still trying to figure out which things fit where. So I could not find a good explanation of why this is separate. Then you have e-commerce total quantity. So if you are using e-commerce, then you will be able to see that information. Let me see if I can find some e-commerce data in here. Query table. Yeah, let's do that. Meanwhile, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I do have some event information, I mean, e-commerce information here. Yeah, question. I have a question. You was mentioning that we can set data to flow intraday or not in BigQuery while setting up. Can you show me that setting? Yes, I can show you quickly if I have time. But if not, there is a separate video that I have, which is on this platform. So on the channel itself, you should be able to get that. If not, I'll put in a code here. Anyway, I can't find any, maybe that it was in a different scenario here, but I'll take a look. But let me go through these ones and then I'll try to find some values here. So here you have the e-commerce stuff. How much total quantity was of products was sent in that transaction? How many purchase? What was the revenue in USD? And you can have revenue in both your currency as well as USD on your site. There are e-commerce settings that you can do. I will be doing in session on e-commerce, particularly like how to track them. But if you are interested, that's all also going to be in the course, which is available on Optisant Academy. E-commerce purchase revenue, e-commerce refund value in USD. So, and this is USD and this is in your local currency, whatever that currency is. In USD, shipping local value. So they are basically behind the scene. Google is tracking both in the local currency as well as USD. Tax, what's the transaction ID, item ID, item name, brand, variant, all that properties that you can pass for a particular item. So each item can have multiple properties, what's the brand, what's the variant in terms of like, whether it's, so you can put in the size of the product, the shipping container size, or you can put the colored, whatever you want. You can put in multiple values here, whether it's in the variant or categories. So you have up to 5 categories. Then you have brand and variant along with your item to really identify what item you're selling in this transaction. Then you have item price, quantity, again, item refund in US. We went through this. Promotion name, creative name, etc. Promotion name, creative name are all tied to if you have on-site promotion where you're selling certain products and saying, go buy this product, then each of those, that history of where user is clicking from on that product can be tracked here. And then you have item list name. Let me see if I can find this item. It has to be there because I created some test data. I should have saved that. Okay. Meanwhile, I'll take questions. So please feel free to send me your questions here. Okay, here I'm going to do this. Geo, where, geo dot city. Okay, here it is. So you can see this e-commerce data right here coming in. E-commerce total quantity, revenue in USD, purchase revenue, which is in local currency, which is USD in this case as well. There is no refund, shipping value, shipping value in local currency. You have tax, how many um, unique items. So how many products are being sold here? In this case, what's the transaction ID and what was sold, all these items. So you can see like item variant is full version of this Amazon ebook on Amazon book, ebook, what was the category, etc. So you can pass in bunch of information. Then you have the price in USD, item price, etc. So here you have all the e-commerce data. Then you can pass in other stuff as well. I just created something quickly for this class to show you how this data looks in this sample. Okay, any questions so far on this? No? Now I'm going to go and actually show you in Google Analytics on how to set this up. So give me a minute here. Analytics. All right. When you are in Google, can you guys still see my screen, right? So when you are in Google Analytics, go to your admin panel. Within admin panel in Google Analytics 4 property, you will have BigQuery linking. Click on it. And this is where you are linking BigQuery. You can see daily and streaming. Continuous within seconds of event arrival is your intraday. And then you have a daily export, a full export of the data daily. This is where you can set it up. If you uncheck this, then you'll only get daily. If you uncheck this, then you'll only get streaming. If you check both of these, you'll get both, and the streaming will be rolled into daily every day. And the whole process of setting it up, because it's not just checking it here, you have to set a bunch of other stuff as well for your data to flow. All you're doing here is, hey, I want to send this data. And then you have to make a connection with BigQuery, where the BigQuery then picks it up. There is an API that you have, service that you have to enable. All that is covered in my other video. So if you search here on the BigQuery, you will see the video that I did about a month or 2 months ago. In that one, I showed you the process on how to set it up. Step-by-step instructions are there. Once day pass, day in intraday will get rolled over to day or will contain data. It'll be rolled over to that day. The full daily will happen. So you'll only have this much, and you don't want every day's single days of data anyway, intraday data, because all you want is all it is doing is the same data, it just renamed into a different table. By having in two different places, you will actually be using more resources on BigQuery, and that can be expensive for you. So best option is to roll it over into daily and not worry about intraday. Intraday is only used if you are trying to debug something. Then it's critical that you use intraday so that you can go in and check, hey, I just enabled these user properties. Are they coming across? I just enabled this e-commerce. are they coming across, because you don't want to wait for the full day of data to be collected. Cool. Any other questions? Any comments? How was it? Anything that's not clear, let me know. This is all I have on BigQuery, and I'm ready to take any questions or look into other aspect as well. If you want to look at all the fields, simply click on any of these tables and you can see which type of value they contain. Either it's string, which is alphanumeric value, integer, or there might be record. Record is event parameters and event parameters, their key and values, and user properties key and values. They are record, right? So user properties are record. Rest of them are going to be either integer or string. Float is where it comes into decimal. So you can go ahead and look at all these values, but now you should get an idea of what data is contained. So when you enable Google Analytics for data into BigQuery, and I highly recommend that you do, go ahead and look into the data. Now, those who are familiar with SQL or SQL, you should be able to write queries fairly easily. If not, then I would suggest take a SQL course to learn how to do it, because there is a lot that you can do with this data. So mindset has to be changed, right? Previous mindset about canned report in Google Analytics 4, that has to change for people, because it's not going to be canned report that you can rely on. Maybe Google will release them, but so far they haven't released a lot of reports. And there is no official word in terms of whether those reports are coming or whether they won't release them. Maybe they want to wait and see on how people react to these things. A lot of people who are used to the old Google Analytics are very frustrated. I can see that. I mean, I'm not sure how many of you are part of my Facebook group on Google Analytics, but there are about 16, 17,000 people in that group. And every time somebody who has been used to the old way of doing stuff is actually very dissatisfied with the new way of doing stuff. Why? Because they haven't figured it out. In my opinion, new way of doing stuff is actually better, because you're not operating in a black box and saying this is what's happening in the reports. You can actually go in the data and see why a number shows up the way it shows up. Do you suggest any SQL course for beginners? Yes, we do have a course. I have a course on Optizent Academy, so I can go ahead and show you that. If you can still see right here, if you go on Optizent Academy and look at program option, all courses, you have a SQL course, which is at 35 days, 30 minutes a day. It teaches you SQL. Now, it's not going to teach you BigQuery SQL, but it'll teach you enough SQL syntax that you can use in BigQuery. Or you can do BigQuery for marketers and marketing analysts, which is a complete course that'll also cover several use cases. So you can use those use cases directly on your business. Hey, how do I find purchasers? How do I find people who refund all the time? How much total refunds, etc. All those use cases will be covered. So you can just take the code as is and use. Or better yet, which is what I recommend, is become a member. And if you become a member, and those who are new, this is an expensive membership, but only for people who are really serious, because then I get involved in these things and I teach people and I make sure they are successful whenever they need it, or other students will help. But if this is expensive to start with, which has pretty much a lot of stuff, you can go to Optizent Insider membership, which is a beginner version that also contains some of, actually it should contain a BigQuery introduction, but it has SQL courses as well. And this is a cheaper version. So you get $29.99 per month. And from every now and then, I will do a coupon. If anybody is really serious, then I can reach out to me and I'll make that happen for you. Yeah, tons of options here for you to learn about analytics. If you want to be a data-driven, um, a marketer, analyst, then I suggest you become a member and you'll learn a lot. Cool. Any other questions? If not, then make sure, I hope this was good. So make sure to give it a thumbs up on this video and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Those who want to learn, there is also tons of free information I provide. Like you can look at my past sessions. Every Thursday, we do a live session on some topic within digital analytics. Have done a lot of live sessions in past, and we'll continue. This year, the goal is to do 5 live sessions, and we've already done how many? I think I've already done, this is second or third. I don't even remember now. But yeah, I think this is the third one this year. But the plan is to do 40 live sessions. So you'll see a live session pretty much every week. Next week, we are doing 5 Google Analytics or 15 Google Analytics features that you should look at and use. So that I will have a guest speaker who will be talking about his experience. It's not about just in these sessions, it's not just about me, my experience, but I bring in other experts as well, other folks. So those who are listening and watching here, and if you have something that you want to share with others, feel free to reach out to me and you could be my next guest here. So these guests are people who are working in their field, whether they're starting out. Some people have started out. I had one of my students come on this. He came to my class and he did not know like he can even get a job in this field. He took a class. Comes to me after the class and says, Anil, what do I need to learn more to get a job in this field? And I told him, you are actually ready. I taught you what you will, more than what you will ever learn in any course or even on job. And today he is an analyst at PitchBook. If you look at, this is his second job after taking the class, and look at it, he's on his way to become a data scientist, and he's managing a lot of stuff. He's learning all sorts of other stuff that are actually required for him to be successful. But he was on my channel. He did a B2B marketing challenges, and he will be back again talking about how he transitioned into this career. So make sure to watch these videos, tons of information. All right, if there are no other questions, then like I said before, give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Even if you don't want to become a member or want to learn directly from these courses and from me, you can learn via watching these videos. Cool. All right. That's all, guys. And thank you. And if you do think of any other questions, then please do write a comment below and I will answer them. Thank you, Ravi. Bye. Thank you, Satya.